Bodywork Day 1, July 11th, 2005. Well, I placed the passenger front fender on the truck to see how the IFS would line up. I cut the clearance I needed for the IFS on the motor compartment panel and attached it as well. I also beat out my first dent. Bodywork Day number 2. This is logged July 14th of 2005. I fixed a dent, so here's another post for bodywork. I am mocking up the fenders to check the wheelbase before I permanently weld the rear suspension in. Everything looks fine, so I took the fenders all off and started welding the rear all in together. I got it about half done today. Bodywork Day number 3, July 23rd, 2006. With the framework and engine work mostly done, I am finally going to be able to concentrate on more bodywork to clean up. Obviously, the first item, and likely the most difficult to do, will be the cab. I need to get this thing jocked out to see how the motor will align with the firewall and how that's all going to work out. Trees, that fella down in Tennessee, recently suggested trying to get some motor lower into the frame. That would be great, but I think I would have an even more serious problem with the steering linkage. With motor mounts I devised, he said it would definitely help for cornering the vehicle and help the firewall motor arrangement. He is dead on with the suggestion, but I need to see how the cab will align with the setup I devised with my 3-inch rake anticipated, with the suspensions and the 4 degrees of drivetrain rake I built into my design. This dictates the height of the motor from that point, with the suspension and drivetrain rakes opposing each other. I got the cab out, blew it off with my pressure washer. I cut off the existing firewall by squaring off the cut that some Neanderthal, some guy with a blowtorch in his hand, did to the poor thing some time ago. The cut turned out great, and I used an old oil can to get the radius I want into the corners. The plan will be to get some similar gauge metal, about 32 inches by 14 inches, and roll the ends with an old drive shaft I have. This should tuck in pretty close to what I was able to cut out with my saws and all, or my sawzall, and a jigsaw for the top corner radii. I'm anticipating decent weld of this new section of firewall after I verify the fit with the motor once I remount the cab for some mechanical mock-up. I dried off the cab and ran some 60 grit on a jitterbug to start cleaning off some of the corrosion. I took a sidewinder with a wire brush to start cleaning out the inside a little bit better. I put some penetrating oil in the trim screws inside the door hinges in preparation for their removal. I removed things like the choke and the idle linkages that come through the firewall, the glove box cover, the gauges, the sheet metal screws, and someone used for a saddle hood buffer strip on the cab. One problem I noted was that the box for the seat was bent up some, but it looks like it can be removed cleanly via a few rivets. I am planning on bucket seats or captain chairs for this rig, so the bench seat is really not a likely scenario. The problem I am foreseeing with this is that the floor is not structural like the vertical piece of sheet metal for the bench seat. I think this can be overcome by developing some small box tubular framing and some 1/8-inch plate over that framing rails of the cab. I'm hoping that I might be able to make this removable too for the ease of mechanical surface under the surface of the cab floor for the shifter, the tranny axis, that sort of thing. Another problem I noted was the rotted rocker panels. I've bondoed worse panels back into shape in my past life, but I am seeing some nice replacements for these on eBay, such as for about $75. I think that'll be worth the time saved and the weight that would be added with Bondo filler. Yet another issue was the rough nature of the back of the cab. Man, I hope I can make this look okay. It's been ages and just teenage experience in the bodywork arts. I'm not sure if I'm up to this task. We'll see. Need I go on with problems, but the back of the cab attachment to the floor looks weak, and the rear braces are delaminated from the back wall of the cab. I'll check with my other 36 to see if this is a major concern. I think I might be able to tack weld these units to the back wall, but this metal looks thin, and I'm not the greatest welder. Later in the week, I stopped by Metal Supermarket and I picked up some 1/8-inch plate for the flooring. The guy there took my measurements for the flooring and cut it out accordingly. I brought the pieces home and set them in the floor, and it all looks pretty good. I have some minor fitting to do, but I think I can do it rather than have to bother Scott or Feist with borrowing a plasma cutter to get things to fit. Bodywork day number 4, recorded July 30th of 2006. This weekend I got the old metal under the seat area removed. It was too corroded to save, and I had some 1/8" plate metal rough cut for this area. Actually, under the seat this metal was more than rough cut. It fit pretty well, and I only had to remove a little notch in the back to fit square with a drive shaft hump out of the back of the cab. The floor metal area took some minor grinding to fit nicely into it. It appears that I will have to rework this into a piece with a hump, as preliminary measurements are showing a hump to be necessary to clear the Turbo 350 tranny. The pedal section of the floor fit nicely up to the firewall from what I could tell, but this will need to be humped as well for the bell housing of the tranny. What I was most happy with was the preliminary fitting of the firewall itself. Using an old drive shaft with some C-clamps, I bent 90 degrees, a 3-inch diameter curve that fit pretty well into the oil can curve I cut using for the firewall last week. Now, using a ball peen hammer to get the last few degrees out of the full 90 degree, everything seemed to come out pretty well, and I'm feeling better about the knitting of this rotted cab back into something that is going to work. Bodywork day number 5, recorded August 6th of 2006. I had to get the cab set back onto the frame to get the mock-up of the motor clearance. I had to rework the rotted wooden wedges that go under the cab and onto the frame. Some of the cuts on this piece were interesting. As you can see here, if I had to cut a straight line with a circular saw, I'd have problems. But give me a curve and I can hit the mark just fine. These turned out pretty well with a little jack planing to fit the frame so they would fit solidly. I recut the firewall hole in the cab deeper, like 3 inches back, and that was required. That required me to flatten out a nice curve bends in the sheet metal I made last week with the rebend to fit these. This allowed as well the clearance that I would need for an HEI type ignition I have laying around for this project. I found the stock flooring for the pedal deck of the floor. I had beat this out. I had beat out the hump higher, and then turned out pretty well again with the use of the drive shaft to make the hump transition smooth and straight. I beat out the bottom of the firewall sheet back into the floor hump to shroud over the floor piece. The floor piece will need to be cut back in order to fit and clear the motor tranny bell housing area. I got all this pretty well mocked up, but I ran out of time before I could start welding this all into place. Bodywork day number 6. This is recorded September 28th of 2006. I got to the truck today and I welded the firewall mock-up all together. I took the cab off the frame and put it back on after doing the work. This was in an effort to keep all the welding and grinding from getting into the motor and frame. I hand fit all the edges as best I could. I also patched in the old metal pedal holes in the pedal board of the floor. And for a novice, I'm not ashamed of how everything turned out. Bodywork day number 7, recorded October 7th of 2006. Scott Reed helped out again by cutting out my floor piece with his plasma cutter. I took good measurements and he did a great job with the cutter, as it took very little finish work to get the piece to fit. I then took some cardboard and mocked up some patterns for some steel to extend the transmission hump up to the floor pedal section of the floor. I plan to make a flange under the new hump where it will attach over the top of the pedal flooring with some screws like the rest of the perimeter of this piece that I'm fabricating. I got by Scott's house and got the mocked up piece of steel for the hump cut out with his plasma cutter. I got them back to the shop, and with some minor grinding I got the pieces to fit pretty well, so I tack welded them into place. I will take this floor section out to weld it all solid and grind down the seams. Bodywork day number 8, logged June 3rd of 2007. I hung a pair of doors my cousin chopped for his 36 Ford pickup years ago. This is the truck that most of my fenders and extra parts came from. He, Lloyd, aka Skinny, did an excellent job of the seams on this chop. I eventually found them under some lead he used to smooth out the area. I worked on some of the mechanisms of the doors and some alignment issues with the passenger door. I am now in a quandary as to whether I should consider chopping the cab again. Scott Reed thinks I should. I got a call into Skinny to see how he liked his truck after he chopped his cab. The doors that came with my cab are roached, but Skinny's are chopped. I don't know. I'll make something come together out of this combination. Bodywork, day number 9. This is recorded June 24th of 2007. Quandary solved. Skinny never returned my call. I worked on the fit of both doors to the jambs of the cab. I then took out the window hoist hardware and the door latches, cleaned them with a wire brush, and painted them with some black spray paint, and set to work on the passenger door as the first refit. I decided not to chop the cab, so I unchopped the passenger door. Care with layout and use of simple sawzall and vice clamps for the fit, and it was time to start welding. A resident of the town where I worked by the name of Wayne Goodall suggested using .024 wire in the MIG welder for bodywork. It was a good call. I had a lot of trouble rigging up the spool arrangement. The spool I had would not work with the feeder of the welder. I set it up with a rebar for an axle and set it on a metal box to feed it into the unit on the floor by the welder rack. The next problem I had was the .024 wire, and I had .023 tips. I used a torch cleaner and reamed out the .023 tip to get the wire to fit. I got this all together and worked up the feed speed and the voltage down low and got it to where I could weld sheet metal pretty well. Alright, this video is running on kind of long, so we'll probably break this down into parts and call this part 1 of the bodywork for this 1936 Ford pickup straight rod project. I want to thank you all for watching, and thank you for putting up with just these pictures and what have you. Again, I hope to get live soon, but I'm going to do a couple of more bodywork videos of this project because there's plenty more that we can talk about to get us back to the status of where we're at right now in 2025.